we have a very special guest who is here with us today, and some of you might even say a local legend, Roy Vallee. As many of you know, Roy recently retired as chairman and CEO of Avnet. Roy's career with Avnet spanned 35 years, 13 as CEO. During his time at Avnet, Roy learned just how important marketing can be to ensure the company's longevity and its success. He's here with us today to share some of his expertise and to provide some marketing and management tips and how the two departments can work together to build a successful brand. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Roy Vallee to the stage.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So, thanks very much for that wonderful introduction. Thank you all for coming here, and congratulations to all those participants in this competition. As it was mentioned, I am retired now, and as a working CEO, as you might imagine, there were a lot of breakfast, lunches, dinners. In essence, I didn't have to spend a lot on food, plus I had an income. So having the opportunity to speak for breakfast now that I'm on a fixed income is an opportunity I can't pass up. I am actually very pleased to talk to you today about marketing and communications and how to use its power to accelerate change and achieve your business goals. Before we jump in also, rumor has it that I'm one of the first CEOs to address this group or the BMA in Phoenix, and I would therefore ask that all of you be kind in your tweets. I'm looking for some positive responses. If not, I will be tempted to blog about you. And the interesting thing about that is the content may not be correct, but it can still be damaging. Okay, so what I'm going to do this morning is give you my perspective as next CEO and advisor to companies regarding the importance and the impact of communications. And then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time left over for questions, but trust me, we're watching the clock carefully. We know we've got people that have to get back to work, and we'll make sure that we keep you on schedule. So let me start with the importance of communications. When I first became CEO, which was back in 1998, I started reflecting on what exactly is my job. And I thought about things like, well, I should identify the opportunities that Avnet is presented with. I should also recognize the threats. From there, develop strategies. My job as CEO is to change the status quo, to make progress in those areas, and to move towards the vision that we've adopted for the company. And then I got to thinking, so why are communications important? Well, so the communications that emanate from Avnet are literally the voice of the company. That's what people hear, and that's what forms sort of the image. They're also my personal voice. So there's the Avnet brand and there's the Roy Vallee brand, and communications drives both of those brands. The other thing that I learned is that communications also drives the value of your stock if you're a public company, or let's say the value of your enterprise if you're a private company. And in fact, there is a report or some research that says that 7 to 10% of a company's stock price is actually related to the strength of the brand. So communications can also accelerate business growth and accelerate progress towards your goals. So, it's interesting. Most companies have, visions, missions, strategies, objectives, action items, owners, and we're all making progress there. But the other variable is at what rate. And I think communications and marketing are the ultimate accelerators. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about this more, but communications is also the way in which you can align employees and other stakeholders with your vision, your strategies, and your goals. So in other words, sincerely, I've said this before, not only when I'm addressing a group of marketers, but marketing and communications from my perspective is the number one, number two, and number three tool to affect change from the status quo. and that is fundamentally the responsibility of leadership to affect change. So I realized to become an effective leader or CEO, I would need to be an effective communicator. Now, one more thing struck me. As I was in the process of, noodling through all this and figuring out what role it should play in the company, remember, it was mentioned already that I was 35 years with Avnet. I've been in this business since I was about 17 years old. And back in the old days, I'll take you way back to things like fax machines and teletype machines, et cetera, et cetera. It was pretty common then to have different messages for different stakeholders. So you might have the customer-facing marketing material, you might have employee communications, you might have some more material for stockholders and other investors, and you had messages that were tailored to the audience. And back in the late 90s, it was becoming obvious to me that that idea was really no longer possible. And then if you fast forward to today, quite honestly, it has changed far more than I would have ever anticipated. Today, communications are real time. They're ubiquitous, they're electronic, they're multimedia, they're one-to-one, they're one-to-many, they're many-to-many. And there are many different audiences that we're communicating with. And now we find ourselves in this era of social media, which I think is sort of communications on steroids, excuse me. And the simple reality is that everyone has a voice. By the way, some legitimate and some illegitimate. Don't know how many of you know this, but there was a hacked Twitter feed earlier this week that caused a temporary 600-point drop in the Dow Jones Industrial Average that was recovered pretty quickly by the Associated Press and with some support from the White House. So it was corrected very fast. But that just kind of shows you the impact of communications, but also the immediacy, the ubiquitousness of it. And then the other thing that's happened is, aside from print going to digital, video is now a very significant tactic for most, if not all, companies. So corporate messages, therefore, need to be united. You can't have different stories for different stakeholders because you must assume that all the stakeholders are reading the messages to all the other stakeholders. Okay? So therefore, you must be transparent, you've got to stay current, the messages need to be higher frequency, and they need to be consistent. That's the other doggone thing. Everything is recorded. So at any point in time, you can have an analyst or an employee or a customer say, well, wait a minute, 4 years ago in this email, you said this, now you're saying that. And it just kind of makes you accountable for everything. So the message counts. So therefore, communications has evolved a lot. There are now multiple vehicles or mediums with which we can communicate and we need to communicate. And obviously in the process, print media has diminished in its relative importance, but I don't think it's dead. Personally, one of the things we did at Avnet is we have a sort of a house organ, a newsletter, and we send it to people's homes because we'd like not only our employees, but their spouses and families to read what's going on at Avnet as well. And by the way, as another anecdote, I would tell you that Warren Buffett, who has been known to make a good investment here and there, actually is buying local newspapers. So he must not think print media is quite dead. The other thing that's interesting to me is that most new electronic mediums are actually pretty inexpensive. Some are interactive with the ability to provide survey information, sort of baked in. You can also embed video, and comments are mostly measurable, okay? So you could use digital media, electronic media, for newsletters, magazines, etc. And I would encourage all of you to think about not only the message that you're trying to send, but what is the right medium to send that message, depending upon what it is and who the audience is you're thinking about. Okay? So with all that as background, let me just share with you the journey that I took as CEO. So all of this got me thinking communications was important, that it was changing, and therefore what? What do I do as the leader of Avnet? So I sort of did an inventory, catalog what's out there, and what I found was that Avnet had no public relations or processes for formal employee communications or consistent messaging to all stakeholders. That was the state of the business circa 1998, 1999. So I made a decision. And what I decided to do as CEO was to add a new executive to our senior leadership team. So I went out and I hired the best chief communications officer I could find. And that was Al Mack. Now, all I can say is I wish I'd known about the BMA earlier because maybe we could have done better. So what happened is we brought Al into what we referred to as the Avnet Executive Board. And that means that Al participated in all of our highest level strategic meetings. He got to hear and, importantly, contribute firsthand regarding what's happening, why it's happening, how it's being decided. And that visibility, that position at the chief whatever roundtable aligned him to lead our enterprise-wide communications efforts, both inside and outside of the company. And similar to other business disciplines, the approach to communications started with a strategic lens, sort of merging art and science. So as Al came on board, he did an assessment of what was going on around the company from a marketing communications perspective. And what we found was that there was a wide range of ad hoc activities. Some you could look at and call best practices. Others you might look at and say, really? This is not the brand we're trying to create for Avnet, but there was a wide range. So Al and his team, in conjunction with inputs from the balance of the executive staff, developed a strategic framework for communications. So in other words, we actually applied a process. Who is going to communicate what, to whom, how often, and in what form? What medium were we going to use? So early on, Al also convinced us to do 4 things. Now, most of the other executives in that group were in the category of 40, 50 things, but Al had 4 things. So one of them was to establish one brand versus the many brands that we had. And I'm sure research shows the amount of effort and energy and expense required to actually build and create and sustain a brand. So the more brands you're trying to do, the more difficult and more diluted that job becomes. And Al's thinking was, let's pull it all together. We decided we were going to do that under the Avnet brand. And that may sound sort of as a duh to you folks. But the reality is we had acquired companies all over the world, and in many cases, we were still operating under the name of the company that we had acquired. So this was a big deal, and getting those companies to understand that relinquishing their original name was the right thing to do in the long term. Starting with me, our executive team became responsible for the Avnet brand. We started talking about what is a brand and who owns that brand. And we figured out that, well, frankly, we all do. And so we committed at the senior level to attend a full-day course on branding. The third thing is Al, and I'm going to talk more about this later, encouraged us to engage a global PR firm. We chose a company called Brodeur, partly due to its reputation and partly due to its geographic reach. And this was done back in 1999. And even then, our business had become quite global. We were present pretty much around the world, and we wanted to ensure that our public relations work was consistent across these geographies. And Al believed strongly that PR was critical to creating and marketing the brand globally. And the nice thing about PR, one of the real positives about PR is, when you market yourselves, no matter how much effort and energy you put into that, and no matter how creative the agencies are that you work with, it's you talking about you, right? And that's got some value, quite honestly. But when you can get others talking about you, and you can publicize when others are saying good things about you, that actually can have as big or maybe even a bigger impact than your own efforts to market the company. So the focus of PR is to get third parties to say things about us as opposed to us saying things about us. So then as we roll on, we ended up training over 500 executives globally. And this training, was about how to interact with the media, sort of the do's and don'ts. The media media has its own sort of objectives, right? They have their own stakeholders. One of the primary objectives is to sell more media. And that's not always in your best interest. But if you understand that going in and you know how to interact with the media, then obviously that helps. And part of this training included video presentation skills because we saw that as becoming more and more critical, more and more vital, and one of the mediums that had to be used extensively. So there was a payoff. Fast forward a few years, I'm going to say within about 6 or 7 years, I think, Avnet achieved 50% market share of the coverage in the media related to our industry. So Avnet versus all of our competition combined worldwide, we achieved 50% of the media coverage. And we think that is a direct result of the efforts that we put into marketing. And last, in terms of Al's 4 ideas, executives and employees were encouraged to be more involved in the community and to support charities as individuals in conjunction with Avnet and in conjunction with our customers and suppliers. What we found was this is good for our brand, this is good for employee morale, and frankly, it's good for business. We by participating in community activities, we strengthen our own employees' engagement, we benefit the Avnet brand, and we enhance our ability to recruit the best talent possible within that community. Okay? And I hope you've seen some of that here in Arizona. So again, fast forwarding to today, now corporate communications as a department works with every C-level executive at Avnet. What I mean by that is it's integrated into the strategic plans, not just for the revenue generating parts of the business, but for the support organizations as well. And in fact, even our tightwad retiring CFO, Ray Sadowski, now acknowledges the importance of branding and communications. Now that's really a big deal. If you know Ray, you know how big a deal that is. And in fact, he and our chief information officer are actually the most watched people on our video website. We have a 24/7 video website, and the videos prepared by those 2 individuals are the most watched externally. So these are 2 large support organizations, not Avnet's Electronics Marketing Group or Technology Solutions Group. Okay, so that was kind of the journey and some of the things that we've accomplished at Avnet. I now want to shift and just drill down on one specific area of communication, which is employee communications. And the reason I want to do that is because in my mind, it may be the most important communications. So I don't know how many of you know this. You're a relatively young group. There's a great book, by the way, called Made in America, written by a guy named Sam Walton, who formed Walmart. And Sam believed from the very beginning that if he could treat his employees well enough, they would become the best marketing for the company. And I believe that certainly at least a piece of that is very true for all of us. So from an Avnet perspective, keep in mind that we're not actually a technology company. We're a distribution company that services the technology industry. And service companies, I think, are especially dependent upon their employees and the brand that's created by their employees. So we felt our brand starts with employees and is impacted every single day by every word and every action that our employees, every word they say, every action they take. So we did a little research. We came to the conclusion that employee engagement was the critical objective. And engagement, we learned, was defined as the combination of employee commitment, do they want to do a good job, and this thing called line of sight by Towers Watson, which means, do they understand what it means to do a good job? What does the company try to accomplish, and how does their work connect to that bigger picture? So employee engagement really became the objective. We also learned via research that employee engagement drives customer loyalty. Makes sense, right? When all the customer interactions are with more engaged employees, over time, they have more positive experiences than negative experiences, and that drives customer loyalty. And ladies and gentlemen, the research is pretty clear. Customer loyalty drives profitable growth. It is much more profitable to grow with an existing customer than it is to attract a new customer. Attracting new customers is very expensive. So Avnet embarked years ago on a global employee engagement process, and that included a survey which now encompasses 17,000 employees worldwide. And the frequency is about every 18 months or so. We started off with an annual frequency, and then we've backed off a little bit as we've matured. What's happened at Avnet is that strong employee communications has led us to very strong line of sight scores. And in fact, in the latest survey, the line of sight scores, so these are questions around, do you understand your job? Do you understand how your job impacts the company? Questions like that were created for us by Towers Watson. Avnet's line of sight score is 84% worldwide across 17,000 employees. And because of that, we have elevated Avnet's employee engagement scores to their highest levels ever at 77% worldwide. Keep in mind, by the way, some cultures just don't get overly enthusiastic about survey responses, and the glass is always half empty. So 77% means different things in different parts of the world. So we believe clearly that employee communications plays a direct role in employee engagement. Employee engagement is sort of another word for morale, and that the commitment to listen to employees, take actions, and progress the company on a continuous basis directly impacts the culture and therefore the company's success. So again, stealing a page from our friend Al, who grew up in Chicago, one theme for communications is to communicate early and often. A couple of lessons I want to share with you around employee communications. First one is, if something goes wrong or bad, if there's bad news to share, and I'm speaking very personal about this one, intuition says, ooh, don't talk about it. Right? Let's keep that a secret. Let's only talk about the good things. And by the way, I am a believer in shotgunning or broadcasting all the things the company's doing right. And when you identify specific areas that need work, to do a more rifle shoot approach and isolate those problems and focus on them and create action plans, etc. However, sometimes there are things that apply to most, if not all, employees, and it's things they need to know. We had a bad financial performance. We lost our credit line, things like that. What I learned is that swift and transparent communications are key. The reality is most employees already know what's going on, or they have a pretty good idea, and they're actually waiting to see if management's going to tell them the truth. Okay? Or are they going to varnish it and avoid it? The second thing we learned is that through a lot of M&A activity, that communications are vital to successful integrations. So I don't know if any of you have been or will be involved in M&A. It seems like a very popular sport among businesses. Remember, speed is vital in successful integrations, and communications is vital to achieving speed. One of the things I like to say is that business can only move at the speed of trust, and trust is created through, or at least enhanced by communications. It's also impacted a lot by actions. Okay, rolling forward now. So this is a never-ending journey, right? Social media didn't exist when I started my journey as CEO, but I think now the challenge is to harness it with all stakeholders, customers, employees, embedded into talent acquisition. I happen to think in a corporate environment, if you're in a B2B company and inside a corporate environment, I actually think social media is a very exciting employee communication and engagement activity. If you're in a B2C business, I think it's also a very exciting marketing opportunity. I actually can't imagine what the next few mediums are going to be, but I bet it's not time to close the patent office. I think there's going to be further enhanced communications in our future. But one thing I would ask all of you to do is remember, don't underestimate the fundamentals. So despite how advanced digital or electronic communications become and various media get developed, there's not a substitute for in-person communications. So town halls, and in fact, we did this at Avnet where we identified all of the major facilities around the world, and we made sure that either me personally or one of our senior executives got to each of those facilities at least on a periodic basis. And we would map this out with Al's assistance and make sure it got done. Okay? And as communications evolve, such as the push to mobility and digital, we all must continuously review how we're communicating and where we're putting our marketing efforts and dollars. So in other words, I'm going to step up one level here and just say, look, I think that it's important to not approach communications on a task-by-task basis or ad hoc basis. I think that it is incumbent upon the marketing and communications professionals in their businesses to create a strategic framework for communications. Who is going to communicate what messages to whom, with what media, in what frequency? And then periodically, like all strategic plans, review that and update it based on changes that have occurred in the delivery mechanisms, okay, as well as in your company. A couple of quick proof points for those of you that don't know them. When I became CEO at Avnet, revenues were just under $6 billion a year, already a pretty big and successful company. When I left Avnet, when I left the CEO role 13 years later, revenues were over $26 billion, substantially more profitable, and significantly, dramatically enhanced cash flow. Employees went from 8,700 to over 17,000, and Avnet has been recognized now for the last 5 years in a row as the most valued company in its industry peer group by Fortune magazine. Is it a coincidence that these things were achieved in conjunction with our focus on marketing and communications? I have to tell you, honestly, it's difficult to measure or put into an Excel spreadsheet, but I'm 100% confident that without the focus on communications, we simply wouldn't have achieved these results. So lastly, I'm going to leave you with a call to action. Communications is really not important if you're not worried about aligning stakeholders, affecting change, attracting and engaging talent, driving your brand, or growing. So communications is only important if you care about success. So how do you affect or influence the C-suite in your company? And what I think is true is that there are many different types of executives. And by the way, there are many different formulas for successful executives. And in your businesses, there are probably different levels of maturity around how they view communications and marketing and their thoughts. It might depend upon whether they came from sales or from finance or from engineering. There's just a lot of different types of folks out there. I think the thing for you to remember is that you can help your organization, and the way you do that is by training your bosses. If that sounds funny, the reality is we all have to train our bosses throughout our careers. It's part of our responsibility. Let me assure you one thing. All executives want to be successful, okay? And in fact, all executives are measured and compensated based upon the performance of their business unit or their company. Can we agree on that? So your challenge then is to show them how stronger communications, both internally and externally, will make them and the company more successful. So what can you do? You can provide research. You can share articles, best practices. In other words, create the case for change. How do you do that? It doesn't have to be in formal meetings. It doesn't have to be in thesis papers. You could forward emails. You can forward links. You can lead the horse to water. Eventually, they'll drink if they get thirsty enough. You can also build the strategic plan, as I talked about earlier. Negotiate your budget. Hey, I was a CEO. I know how hard it is to get dollars allocated for marketing and communications. I also know how hard it is to preserve those budgets when the economy is not so hot as it generally is right now. It's just kind of blah. And one of the first things that typically gets cut is the marketing and communications expense. But nonetheless, your challenge is to build your strategic plan, negotiate a budget, start somewhere, and then grow that over time. If you get told no, okay, this is Sales 101, ask why. As you identify the obstacles, figure out what you can do about addressing those obstacles or working around them, and then move forward towards getting a strategic plan in place. Then, whatever budget you get, make sure you measure your results. And I know sometimes this is hard in the Marcom area, but there are data out there that can support you. Sometimes you have to have a little bit of faith or a little bit of intuition to go along with the data. It's not all ones and zeros, but you can measure investments and you can provide regular updates back to the executive team on how the investments are paying off. So for example, Al started measuring Avnet's market share of media coverage within the technology distribution industry. That was a metric we could get our hands on, and it's something that helped us actually build and grow our PR budget, which I'll share in just a moment. The other thing I would suggest to each of you is that you leverage the resources within the BMA. It's a great organization, and I would just encourage you to utilize their resources and any others you can get your hands on. There's a lot of information out there that's available to you at little or no cost. So I want to give you a specific anecdote. I remember this very clearly. When Al came to me, must have been 1998 or 1999, and recommended that we engage this global PR firm, Brodeur, I'm thinking, oh man, okay, so Avnet's already a $6 billion company. We've never done formal PR. Now this guy wants me to go hire a global PR firm. Okay, can you get a feel for how I'm thinking about this? And I had a lot of questions. First of all, what are you talking about? You know, what is PR? What do these guys do for us? How much is it going to cost? What's the return on that investment? And what I was trying to figure out in my own mind, is this an expense or an investment? You know, companies should always be kind of focused on minimizing or reducing expenses, but they should also always be prepared to invest, because investment is what takes you forward. So Al built a case, and he and I compromised, and we agreed on a small budget. We picked a geography, one area of the business with a budget, and we launched with this same firm, and we made the deal with the firm that said, look, we have an intent to go global if in fact we can prove that this actually makes sense. So we launched. Today, Avnet has a large multi-year global partnership with our PR firm, and as I already mentioned to you, very high coverage market share within the media. So let me wrap it up. In closing, I would say to you that communications unequivocally has been vital to Avnet's success. It's not just important to me or to Avnet, but it's important to every business, public or private, large or small. Therefore, what that means is what you do, the marketing communications professionals, what you do is important. If my hunch is right, I'm guessing that you don't always hear that. And you may not always feel that. But you should never forget that what you do really does matter to the success of your business. So architect changes, be the change agent, measure and continuously adapt, to stay current yourselves from a communications, marketing, strategic plan standpoint, and stay focused. If you do that, your organization is going to benefit. You are going to be more successful and happier as a result. And I think that there could be accomplishments greater than your current expectations or even dreams in your future. One last congratulations to all the finalists that are here this morning and to the winners of the Marketer of the Year awards. And I'll say thank you, and I think we have maybe 10 or 15 minutes for Q&A. Okay, thank you. Okay, do we have any brave souls with questions? We have one.
As a CEO, when you're looking at a strategic plan that's put in front of you, what are some of the key points you'd like to see from a marketing person? Okay,
sure. So what I would like to see first of all is, let me digress one step and then go back to the answer, which is, I think there's two things actually in all plans that are important. One is the strategy, what are we trying to accomplish? And the other one is the economics. How much is the investment and what kind of return are we going to get? So one of the things I would always want to look for is the direction you want to move in consistent with where I want to take the company? Is it aligned with our vision, mission, objectives? Is it consistent? Or is this something that, an opportunity just came in to, buy 50 seats at a hockey game, for a team that's not going to make the playoffs, but you got a great deal on the tickets, and we've never talked about hockey before in the history of the company, but you think this is a great idea. If it's not aligned, I might not even get to the economics part of the conversation. But if it is aligned, and that is something we've been talking about from a branding point of view, then I want to go to the next step. And the next step is, so not only the idea, but think of it as the volume dial on the idea. So do we want to do this or not? Well, I'm kind of inclined, yep, because I think we're aligned. Now the question is how much? And we start talking about the size of the investment and what kind of return we can expect from that investment. So what I would therefore encourage all of you to do is try to make sure that when you present plans, you present them with sort of that alignment, which sometimes, tactically gets down to words and images that match up what's coming out of other parts of the organization. But it's got to be sincere too. It can't be sort of made up. It's got to be, can you figure out how to get the two things in alignment? And then also focus on the economic piece. How much of this do you want to do? When? And why is that the right amount? Why is that not too much? Why is that not too little? And what kind of return can the company expect from that? Okay? And by the way, that's the way I would look at plans from IT, HR, sales, everybody else. All right? Other questions?
Laura from Infusionsoft, and we're fortunate that our C-level executives see PR as an investment, and they see it as a driving force behind us achieving our mission. And so as we get bigger and we grow our PR team, can you talk about what the structure of the corporate communications team is at Avnet and what the areas of ownership are?
So, actually I don't think I can. But I think I can answer your question anyway. Okay? One of my favorite sayings, and I would just encourage you to try to memorize this if you can. Structure follows strategy. Okay? Oftentimes, the organization structure actually becomes an impediment to strategy because it was there before, or it's there because of some personalities. Nobody wants to deal with that person, and maybe a sacred cow or two. And so what happens is the organization structure sort of starts moving towards the direction of a Winchester mansion over time. The reality is when you do your strategic planning, so you should almost like set the org chart in the closet, get your team together, talk about what needs to be done, focus on the alignment, focus on the quantity, and then now step back from that strategic plan and say, okay, so what structure makes sense? And if I can give you an example, Avnet did not have a chief communications officer when I became CEO. But that stuff I just told you was actually true. That's the thought process that I went through. And I came to the conclusion, well, if it's that important, then shouldn't it be at the highest level in the company? And so for me, I decided to make communications a chief level job. A similar analogy, we used to have business units, geographically all over the world, and within the organization of each business unit was our logistics operations, our warehouses and value adds. And one day I asked for inventory of what was going on there, and I found out we had 2 million square feet of warehouse, we had 2,500 employees, we had a freight spend of almost $100 million a year, and it struck me that Avnet was actually in the logistics business. And that logistics was core to the distribution industry. And the punchline is I created a chief logistics officer to make the structure follow the strategy. So the way I would answer your question is start with your strategic plan for marketing and communications overall or for public relations in specific, And then look at your org chart and ask, do I have my resources at the top of the org chart aligned with what we're trying to accomplish in the strategic plan? And if not, make moves in that direction. Sometimes those moves are hard. Changing org charts is very difficult, but that's the way progress is made. Okay? And the other thing I can tell you about change is, one way to deal with change when it's difficult, don't avoid the change that's actually necessary, but if you allow yourself the luxury of time to get there, so maybe you'd like to make changes tomorrow, but the realities of the organization are that ain't gonna happen. So you can start laying groundwork for changes that will evolve over a 3, 6, 9, 12-month period and get you where you want to go eventually. Okay?
You ever said no to a marketing idea and then in hindsight wish you would have supported it or said yes?
I don't know, Al. Have I ever said no to you?
Yeah.
One thing about my personality is I do try hard to make sure that I get wiser as I get older and not just get older. So I try to learn from mistakes, but at the same time, quite honestly, good or bad, I don't tend to second guess. I don't tend to look back. So offhand, I can't think of one. You got any ideas?
50th anniversary work.
But I said yes, eventually. So yeah, there were ideas. For example, Al came walking into my office and he said, look, Avnet's coming up on its 50th, anniversary since inception. I think we should make some noise about that. And I'm like, do our customers care about that? Do our suppliers care about that? And Al kept chipping away and he convinced me, yeah, I think they do. And so I thought, okay, that's aligned. So how much you want to spend? And we had that conversation and, he sucked me in. We started off slow and then the thing got bigger over time. But then he came to me with the stupidest idea I've ever heard, which is, I think we should build a museum. Like, what? Avnet is a big company, revenues are big, but I'm telling you, margins in the distribution business are tight. This is a low margin business, and we scrutinize every expense dollar. And this guy wants me to build a museum. You gotta be crazy. But he kept chipping away. He kept fighting away. I said, Al, what's the ROI? How are we gonna measure this? What are we doing? What are we trying to accomplish with a museum? So he kept coming back to me with, well, we need employee engagement. And, he kept chipping away, using my words against me. And we finally got to this point where we said, look, just give me the space. So there's already existing space and an existing building, and we can put things together, we'll get it done. Now, the truth is, I don't really know how much he spent, but I know how much he told me he spent. And I finally gave him the green light and we got it done. And after we did, to this day, we still have people coming through the building saying, wow, what a fantastic museum. It's a tribute to the company. It speaks volumes to the culture. And it gives you this impression that Avnet is this rock of Gibraltar that's been in the business, for years and years. And there's some fun stuff in there, like, the Beatles getting a guitar from an Avnet company and stuff like that. So I can't actually think of, there might be, I'm going to twist your question. Because honestly, I don't tend to look back much, but I'll twist your question around. There's a lot of stuff that I said no to Al initially, but he came back. Because he asked why. And then he came back and started to address the whys, and he got me warmed up, and then ultimately we got to where we could try something. We agreed on some common denominator, very unlike Congress. We figured out something we could agree on, and then that would be the beginning. And if that was successful, then he'd throw some more logs on that fire, or gasoline on it, and we would grow it from there. Okay? Okay, last one.
So you're 99 before Al. You're a $6 billion company, obviously doing pretty well. And then Al came in and changed the culture, emphasized PR and marketing and communications. So over the years, what have you told your peers at CEO or C-suite level who don't emphasize PR and communications as to why they should? I guess the other part of that is why. What reasons have they given you for them not putting an emphasis on marketing and communications?
Great question. And the reality is, I have given this pitch, I've essentially given this pitch to peers. I've been asked to speak at things like executive roundtables and industry conferences. The difference is, in those audiences, I talk about a broader subject matter, and communications is an element of it, so I don't drill down as much as I did for you today. I've only done this pitch with this depth to one more audience, which was a national BMA convention in Chicago. Is anybody there? So you might have recognized some of the material. I apologize for that. But it was a few years ago, so, and a few updates with it. So, the fundamental message within the total perspective or framework of what executives and companies need to accomplish is that whatever you're trying to do, communications is an accelerator. So go ahead and use whatever process you want to use to figure out vision, mission, objectives for the company. Figure out where you want your company to go, and understand communications can help you get there faster. And, oh, by the way, it's not terribly expensive. Compared to a lot of other cost centers in the organization, this one is a relatively modest investment. So for a relatively small amount of money, you can put some horsepower into what you're trying to do with your company. And that's the basic message that I've given. And I will say, in most cases, once I've spoken to them in words that sort of CEOs speak or finance speak, they get it and they go away and pay some attention to it. Okay, I'm going to leave you with one last thought, which is one of the keys for the executives that you work with is not so much whether or not they are pro-Marcom or not pro-Marcom. It is that they understand themselves and understand, if they're not expert at this and they're uncomfortable with it and they don't value it, then they need to give you the opportunity to show them and to prove it to them. And you can do that over time by examples, including, you heard this guy named Vallee speak, and here's what he had to say, and there's this company Avnet, and here's what Avnet's accomplished, and they put communications into the C-suite, and just keep chipping away. Executives want to be successful. They want their companies to be successful. Your challenge is to convince them that communications will accelerate their success and the company's success. Okay, thanks, and again, congratulations to you.